Beneath the crimson moon, shadows deepen and blood spills. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Comment your city. I love hearing them. Wolfe's pursuit begins under scarlet skies. Even in a house that lives on routines the way a trout lives on current, there are little ripples. Fritz humming when the market had good mushrooms, or a phone call from a woman who could make Mr. Goodwin sound like a promise. But this one was a ripple with coloring. It reached me at 9:12 a.m. on a Monday when I opened the front door and a man the size and shape of a file cabinet handed me a flat round tin done up with waxed linen and a paper seal stamped with a crescent red as a traffic stop. "For Mr. Nero Wolfe," the cabinet said. He had a voice that would have fit a smaller piece of furniture. He tipped his cap like he'd heard tell of courtesy and wanted to practice at home, and he tramped down the steps to join a brown sedan that couldn't decide if it was bored or shy. I took the package in and gave it the full vestibule treatment, which is to say I glanced at it, at the clock, and at the closed office door. At that hour, Wolfe's office might as well be a chapel, and the man in it an unmoved deity, unless the interloper has papers with dates on them or food. We were between the two. I had papers. The tin tried to look like food, but nothing that cylindrical had ever passed Wolfe's lips. I took it downstairs to the office anyway, because I appreciate a good experiment, and because my curiosity has an arrangement with my feet. The office, if you haven't had the privilege, is built to suggest that reason is more comfortable than passion. A thought I've never found persuasive, but which makes a nice setting. Wolfe was behind his desk under the yellow globe that makes his complexion look like expensive parchment. The big chair held him the way a bank holds deposits. He had the Times folded in fours on his lap and a bottle with the right amount left. "Mail," I said, setting the tin on the edge of his desk blotter as if it were a polite stranger at a crowded party. He didn't look at it or at me. "You're acquainted with the function of a wastebasket," he said. That voice can make wastebasket sound as classical as Parthenon. "Sure. The trouble with this one is it may be a guest, not trash." I tipped the lid to show him the seal, a red crescent stamped over the words Crimson Moon. Delivered by a courier who'd pass away in. He angled the bottle and took a swallow that had been earned by a lifetime of swallowing. Then he folded the paper to reveal only his eyes. If Wolfe gives you a before 11, you might as well ring a bell." I slid the tin farther in his gravity. He inspected the seal, not touching, as a cat inspects a door you've opened when he had no plans to leave the room. He read the return address I had not. Not an address at all, but an embossed name, Lennox H. Vale, Squire. "Never heard of him," I said, which is both a confession and a boast in my line. "You wouldn't." Wolfe's eyelids drooped. "He is a lawyer who never loses, or rather, he never loses where it counts. He chooses his cases as Fritz chooses apricots." "You've been keeping side lists again." "I have memory." He set the paper aside and spared the tin 10 seconds more of his attention. "Do not break the seal. Call Mr. Vale. Offer him an appointment for 12:15. If he asks where we got his name, shall I say from your mental scrapbook or from the embossed paper he sent? Say nothing. Make the appointment." I made the call. The number was listed under an office near Madison, and I expected to get a marble reception committee. Instead, I got a voice that sounded like polished walnut, a male secretary. I identified us, and he proved that when a lawyer never loses, it's because he hires men who never forget. Mr. Vale, I was told, had intended to come at 11. Finding we had orchids at that hour, would 12:15 do? It would. I hung up and told Wolfe that the red crescent would not clash with the noon light. He grunted and reclaimed the Times. I left the tin on the corner like a promise and went to check with Fritz about lunch, which is the sort of business that keeps this house aligned with civilization. Fritz had tenderloin on the brain and a mood to match. He unloaded an opinion that nothing pairs with chanterelles but restraint, and I pocketed it for later use because Wolfe thinks restraint is an insult invented by people with small appetites. By noon, the office had warmed itself to a comfortable suspicion. The orchids had been admired and misted in their 9 to 11 domain upstairs, and Wolfe had returned to do less active work. The tin sat, virginal but smug. At 12:13 the bell rang, which told me a thing about Mr. Vale. His kind are precise in their movements, as if walking on a grid you can't see. I opened the door and found precision embodied. Tall, 50-ish, a face like a pen nib, grey hair cut clean. He wore a navy suit that had never slumped and a tie that probably had a character reference. He carried a hat as if it were the top of a chessboard he was about to lay down. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, with the walnut tone upgraded to mahogany. "Thank you. I'm Lennox Vale." "Welcome," I said. "We keep a quiet house, but we let lawyers in if they promise to wash after." I took his hat and showed him to the office. Wolfe didn't rise, but he did one of his 3 bows, the kind reserved for judges and butter sauces. Vale sat in the red leather chair facing the desk. His attention went directly to the tin and back to Wolfe so fast I could see the circuit. "You received it," he said. "We did," Wolfe said. "Unopened. I abhor ceremony, but the seal recommended restraint." A corner of Vale's mouth moved a quarter inch. "Good. I apologize for the imposition, Mr. Wolfe. I believe I have come to the only place in New York that can help me without moving more than necessary." "I move when it pays," Wolfe said. "Of course." Vale crossed one knee, not carelessly. "I won't pretend this is conventional. I am counsel to the Crimson Moon Foundation." He tapped the tin with a knuckle that cost money to insure. "The seal is theirs. The foundation is a trust established by a client of mine, now deceased, who was eccentric." "Name?" I asked, because it's my line. Vale hesitated the exact number of seconds it takes to choose between candor and the illusion of it. "Mrs. Imogene Farwell. She built a cosmetics company from a kitchen and a dream and sold it for a number with 2 commas. In her waning years, she developed interests." He eyed the ceiling with an internal sigh. "She liked to name things. The Crimson Moon was one. The foundation funds grants in culinary research, botanical preservation, and the rehumanization of the urban table." Her phrase, not mine. Wolfe's eyebrows performed a duet. "Culinary research," he repeated. "And you bring me tea." "It is not tea," Vale said, and at last we were playing. "It is a tin, the sort a premium tea might inhabit, holding a set of documents and an object. Both must remain sealed until this evening at 9, when they will be opened in the presence of 4 people I shall name, at an address I shall supply." "You want to borrow our office," I said, "and our help with the chairs." "I want to borrow Mr. Wolfe." Vale's eyes took a moment and measured the beams of the room. "The foundation is under pressure. There have been attempts, small, officious, easily dismissed, to alter its course. Our board is in theoretical alignment but practical disarray. Tonight, Mrs. Farwell's final directive is due to be revealed. I've been given reason to suspect someone will try to prevent that. I require a mind that can sit still and make movement unnecessary for others." Wolfe sniffed. "On him, it's a paragraph." "And why do you think you can buy mine?" "Because you are for sale at a price you set, and because it amuses you to set it." Vale leaned in 1 inch. "And because I will not bring police into this unless an actual crime is committed, and you, Mr. Wolfe, are famous for preventing crimes by publicly arranging how they would occur and humiliating the would-be offender." That was one way to flatter a man who hates flattery. The line between Wolfe's eyes deepened. He was thinking whether he'd have to endure human company in the evening. "You expect interference. You brought the tin here to keep it safe?" "To keep me honest," Vale said softly. He reached in his inner pocket and came out with a sealed envelope. "Cream," heavy, addressed by hand to N.W. in a script that had opinions. Mrs. Farwell wrote this 3 years, and a winter ago, to be given to you if the night she called Crimson Moon ever came to be threatened. She said you would understand why she sent for you. I will say that I did not see Wolfe's eyes widen. If you had been watching with a microscope, you might have seen a tremor in the atmosphere. He held out his hand. Vale placed the envelope on the blotter. Wolfe turned it, felt its weight, not heavy, and looked at the writing. Then he looked at Vale as if measuring him against it. Mrs. Farwell consulted me years ago, he said. We spoke on sources, not law. She had the intelligence to value both. He tapped the envelope with a finger you could use to draw right angles. You did well to bring this. Archie. I took the letter and slid a blade under the flap. Wolfe accepts that I can perform certain acts without scandalizing the room. Inside was one sheet, thick, and a card the size of a playing card, wrapped in black tissue. I passed the page to Wolfe and kept the card hovering in my hand until he nodded. The page was short. His eyes left it and came back to the first line twice. Then he laid it flat. He breathed out, a small installment. She asks a favor, he said. You knew her, Vale said, politely shocked. I know no one, Wolfe said, but I conversed with her. He looked at the card I was still holding. Open it, Archie. I unwrapped the tissue. Inside was a photograph, not glossy, of a dish. A shallow white bowl holding what looked like a custard wearing a lace of crimson oil. Beside it was a spoon with a handle of horn. On the margin, in the same hand as the envelope. The moon is made of saffron, Mr. Wolfe. The crimson is choice. Under that, a symbol. A crescent like the one on the tin. Mrs. Farwell, Wolfe said, and his voice held a grain of something like respect, which is about as common as snow in July. Had a sense of occasion. So she proposes that I host her little revel tonight under my roof and prevent unpleasantness by presence and articulation. Vale nodded. If you will. And if you refuse, I will take the tin back and put the matter in the hands of men who will turn it into a diagram, after which we will spend a year being audited by those with fewer scruples and more pens. Names, Wolfe said. Who are the 4 who must be present? Vale pulled a small notebook and gave me a look that understood where the pencil lies. Dr. Camilla Orozco, professor of ethnobotany at Columbia and a member of the Foundation's Advisory Council. Martin Krell, culinary historian and sometime television personality. Juliette Renoir. Not her real name, I supplied, because it's part of my charm. Stage name, yes, Vale agreed without offense. She is a restaurateur with 2 establishments and 3 creditors and an interest in the Foundation's grants program. And he hesitated. Don't, I said. We won't think you're dramatic if you come. Right out with it. And my brother, Vale finished. Harold Vale. He manages the Foundation's day-to-day. He is gifted, obstinate, and he believes that the future is a spreadsheet. He thinks Mrs. Farwell's directives are embarrassingly romantic and must be corralled. He is wrong. How many are wrong? Wolfe asked. He cocked an eyebrow at the tin, as if to count. And what about you? Are you wrong? I am not, Vale said, which is a sentence most men should file for after they have died and been vindicated. I know my brother too well. He is not criminal, but he is desperate in a clean way, and he is under pressure from, what shall we call them, partners. Dr. Orozco has convictions, Mr. Krell has a brand, Miss Renoir has appetites. The Foundation has money. If the directive inside that tin doesn't align with their needs, someone will find a way to claim it never existed. I whistled a note that wouldn't pass for music at MoMA. That's a lot of motive for one little tin. Wolfe leaned back. It is like watching a mountain rediscovering its own hinterlands. You brought this to me, he told Vale. because you suspect someone will try to substitute documents or to accuse the Foundation of fraud, thereby wrecking its operations long enough for carrion to gather. Vale's nod was not a nod so much as an agreement, crossing the street. Yes. Then we will host your ceremony. Wolfe's hand lifted a fraction and settled again. With conditions? You will invite only the 4 you named. You will bring them at 8:30. There will be no weapons, physical or rhetorical, brought in by any party. If any presents a precondition, he will be left outside. I will control the order of speech, the opening of the tin, the reading of whatever is inside, and the immediate aftermath. That is acceptable, Vale said. It was too quick to be a negotiation. He had come to agree. My fee, Wolfe said, and now we were back in the comfortable civilization of commerce, will be $25,000, payable before the proceedings, with a bonus of 75 should I achieve an outcome satisfactory to you and detrimental to malefaction. Vale's pen-nib face did a calculation visible to the naked eye. Done. He pulled a checkbook from his inner breast pocket. The checks were joined to the spine as if they had been ironed into it, and he wrote with a fountain pen that sipped the page. He tore free the rectangle and laid it on the blotter. I looked at the number, which was 5 figures with the right commas. I've seen bigger checks and smaller men. Vale was not either. He stood. I will return with the 4 at 8:30. If there is anything you need, name it. Privacy, Wolfe said, and Fritz will require that Ms. Renoir not be allowed in the kitchen. She will want to see how the sausages are made. Vale smiled in a way that admitted humor in others. I will advise her. Thank you. He took his hat, and I escorted him to the door. On the stoop he paused, looked back at the windows, and said a thing that put weight on my shoulder blades. Mrs. Farwell said that if there was a mind in the city that could make men ashamed without raising a voice, it was in that house. I hope she was right. You and me both, I said, and shut him out of our privacy. Back in the office, I studied the tin and then Wolfe, in that order. You really knew Mrs. Farwell? I knew her palate, he said, and her ability to be amused at the right times. She sent me a jar of something once. Saffron? Crimson oil? A relish, he said, and his eyelids drooped in memory. Pomegranate and pepper. It made lamb inevitable. I parked myself on the corner of my desk, which is where I go when I want to be decorative and in range. So is this a will opening or a séance? It may be both, he said. Mrs. Farwell had the vice of imagination. She is dead. She has arranged one more dinner conversation. Archie, call Saul Panzer. I want him outside at 8, to observe arrivals in the street. No one is to move the tin, and call Fritz. He must devise a course that suggests gravity without grease, and tell him that if Miss Renoir asks for the kitchen, he is to exercise his old-world diplomacy and a carving knife. Check. Anything else? Yes. He steepled his fingers, as if testing whether the arch was sound. We must know our guests before they arrive. Tell Saul to get us what he can in 4 hours on Dr. Orozco, Mr. Krell, and Miss Renoir, the sort of facts cranks forget about themselves. For Harold Vale, we shall rely on the obvious, his brother's opinion. You don't trust obvious. I don't trust anything, he said. But I can use it. He glanced at the photograph still on my desk. And Archie, do not tell Fritz about the saffron moon. He will want to reproduce it by 7, and this is not a night for experiment. I called Saul. You do not need me to tell you that when a job requires being at the right place without anybody knowing, Saul Panzer treats it like a piano, treats keys. He took the names and said he'd play a few tunes and call back by 5. When I told Fritz we'd have guests who shouldn't be fed anything that could be flung, he took it as a professional problem and went away murmuring about veal. By 2, the house had settled into the way it gets when there are outsiders coming. Wiped surfaces, air that disdains dust, and the sense that the brownstone was narrowing its tolerances like a gentleman tightening a tie. At 3, the phone rang for me. It was a woman's voice, the kind that had read a lot of journals, but not much poetry. "Mr. Goodwin, this is Dr. Camilla Orozco. Mr. Vale tells me we will be intruding this evening." "Think of it as enriching the environment," I said. "We're a hands-off sanctuary unless you try to feed the orchids." "I would never. I wanted to ask—" She paused. "I want to ask if the Foundation's property is in your possession." "It is," I said. "And if the tin could have purred, it would have." "Good. Then we will all see the same thing at the same time." Her voice cooled a shade. "Please inform Mr. Wolfe that if anyone tampers, I will be the first to object publicly." "He adores public objections," I said. "They give him a reason to sit still." She hung up with a courtesy that had thorns. I told Wolfe. He closed his eyes. "Ethnobotanists," he murmured. "They believe plants give them character." "At least they know the names of things," I said. Before I could prove I know the names of 3, the doorbell rang again. This time it was not a file cabinet, but an envelope in a boy's hand. It had our address and my name underlined. The boy had been told to demand a signature and stand as if signatures were something you caught. I signed and brought the envelope into the office. The paper was cheap, the handwriting not. Big block letters that wanted to lean forward but had been ordered to stand up. Inside was one sentence on a strip. "If the moon opens tonight, someone will bleed." No signature, no flourish, only a small red crescent stamped in the corner that matched the seal on the tin like a guilty twin. I passed it to Wolfe. He took it between thumb and forefinger the way you take a dead fly. He read it once and put it down. He didn't look at the tin. He didn't need to. "Archie," he said, "put that with Mrs. Farwell's letter and the photograph. Lock them in the top drawer, then call Mr. Vale. Use the exact words. After that, tell Fritz we will need more napkins." Expecting tears, I asked. "Human beings leak under pressure," he said, "and Mrs. Farwell's contrivances have drawn blood before." "Metaphorically. It will be instructive to see if her last one chooses a different fluid." I made the calls. Vale took the message with a silence that had more weight than most men's speeches. He said nothing more than, "We will be punctual." When I returned to the office, Wolfe had his eyes on the tin at last. The red crescent on the seal glowed like it knew headlines. He leaned back and let out a breath that sounded like the beginning of a plan unwinding itself. "You're taking this personally," I told him, "because when something touches his pride, the room gets another 5 degrees of climate. Is it the saffron moon or the woman who sent it?" "It is the fact," he said, and the words were dry as chalk, "that my house is the only place in this city where the evening will proceed as it should. When people believe they can improve on order, they beg for instruction. Tonight we will teach. And if someone wants to bleed about it—" He opened his eyes, and the gold in them wasn't beer. "Then we will arrange a lesson in first principles, of appetite, of ambition, and of limits." He reached for the bell that calls Fritz, because even philosophy is better after you've decided on a menu. The tin sat where it had sat all day, virgin and declaring it, and the day leaned toward evening with the confidence of a host whose chairs are counted and whose floor will be swept after. The brownstone holds itself like a clenched fist. When it opens, you want to know why and who's going to feel it. Tonight, it would open at 8:30 for 4 people and a directive. We had a photograph of a dish and a warning about blood to season the wait. And Wolfe, who doesn't pray or pace, had agreed to preside over a moon that called itself crimson. If you think that's just a color, you haven't been to dinner here. By 5 o'clock, the brownstone had adjusted its metabolism for the night ahead. Fritz had drafted a menu that could have calmed the Spanish Inquisition: veal in cream, asparagus with lemon, and a dessert that didn't risk emotion. And Saul Panzer's first report arrived like a surgeon's note, clean, efficient, and with no wasted adjectives. Orozco had 2 degrees and 1 conviction, Botanical research should be owned by no one. She'd fought a pharmaceutical company in court for patenting a plant that grew in Guatemala, and won. She wasn't rich, but she wasn't hungry either. Krell was a culinary personality, which is what you call a man whose recipes are shorter than his monologues. He had 3 TV credits, a line of authentic sauces made in New Jersey, and a publicist. Juliette Renoir had reinvented herself so often, the paperwork would have tired an IRS agent. Actress, restaurateur, visionary of immersive dining. Currently, her assets were as liquid as soup left overnight. Wolfe read the report in silence, except for one sound, his tongue clicking once against his teeth. That was approval, mild, but there. Competent people, he said. Dangerous in proportion to their vanity, which of course is to say, extremely. Wouldn't be a dinner worth attending otherwise, I said. And the Vale brothers? Brothers, he murmured, are curious things. Nature's way of rehearsing enmity before allowing it among strangers. He folded the page and looked toward the tin. We shall see which one loves the other enough to ruin him. By 6, the office lights had mellowed. The orchids upstairs were locked away from temptation. I'd made sure the downstairs was ready for visitors who'd want to size the place up. No photographs of Wolfe, no stray books suggesting weakness, and the good chairs in position for interrogation disguised as civility. The tin sat at the corner of the desk under its own small spotlight. It looked innocent, which was its first lie. The doorbell went at 8:25. I opened it to Saul, who came in with that quiet precision that makes even a whisper look clumsy. Street's clean, he said. Vale's car's coming down now. Nobody followed that I could see. He gave a small nod and was gone before I could offer a drink, his version of affection. At 8:30 sharp, Precision rolled up in a black sedan. Vale stepped out first, followed by a woman in a coat the color of late cherries, Juliette Renoir. Behind her came a thin man with a neat beard who moved as if sound might stain him, Dr. Orozco's academic grace. Krell emerged last, carrying a smile that had been trimmed and shellacked for studio lighting. Another car pulled in just behind. Harold Vale, broad-shouldered, younger by a decade, face fixed in something that pretended to be tolerance. When they entered, the room altered. The brownstone doesn't like strangers, and it shows. Air tightens, wood listens. Wolfe stayed seated, as arranged, in his great yellow chair, eyes half-lidded, weight centered like an emperor disguised as a patient man. Mr. Vale, he said, nodding to the elder brother, and your company. Be seated. They did. I handed coats to the rack and distributed drinks. 2 martinis, 1 sherry, 1 soda, and an abstention. Renoir took the martini and the center of attention. Krell smelled the air, muttered about the haunting bouquet of Fritz's veal, and took the other. Orozco's eyes scanned the room like a field report in progress. Harold Vale refused everything except control of his own face. Wolfe waited until silence arranged itself properly, then said, The object on my desk is the sealed property of the Crimson Moon Foundation. It has remained unopened. At 9, we will break the seal and examine the contents. Until then, we may profit from candor. Mr. Vale, perhaps you will state your purpose. Lennox Vale rose halfway and inclined his head. Mrs. Farwell's final directive is contained within that tin. It determines the Foundation's continuation and its stewardship. Tonight, we ensure transparency. That is all. Harold Vale made a sound that might have been laughter if it hadn't gone through customs first. Transparency? From a man who's been maneuvering trustees like chessmen for 3 years? Lennox didn't flinch. You're welcome to your assumptions, Harold, just as you are welcome to bring your advisors. Renoir smiled faintly. I'm no one's advisor, she said. Just a woman who hates surprises. And lawyers. I am both, Lennox replied smoothly. Wolfe's hand rose, palm forward, a signal for civilization to remember itself. This house tolerates argument only when it leads somewhere. Miss Renoir, Dr. Orozco, Mr. Krell, you are here as witnesses and parties of interest. I will not allow verbal effluvia. You may express one sentence each on why this foundation matters to you. It wasn't a request. Orozco went first, voice clear and cool. Because its grants protect knowledge that corporations bury. Krell followed with a theatrical shrug. Because it celebrates food as art, and art as business, which, if you ask me, is civilization distilled. Renoir tilted her glass, lips curving. Because it funds stories we tell through taste, and because I can't afford to lose that funding. Harold Vale leaned forward. Because it was built on ideals my brother romanticizes and I maintain. Someone has to keep it solvent. The silence that followed was one of Wolfe's inventions, dense, deliberate, and impossible to escape. When he finally spoke, it was slow and exact. So we have ideology, vanity, dependency, and bureaucracy, an admirable balance. Archie, note that down. It may save time later. I wrote it. I knew better than to ask what time we were saving for. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 9. Fritz brought in a tray with coffee, which no one touched, and withdrew with the grace of a man evacuating a volcano before it erupts. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wolfe said, "it is time." I brought the tin forward, set it before him. The seal gleamed under the light. Wolfe's fingers, thick and exact, pressed once at the wax and broke it with a sound that felt too loud. He lifted the lid. Inside were two things: an envelope of creamy stationery and a small velvet pouch tied with a thread of gold. He handed me the envelope. "Read." I opened it. The handwriting was the same. Imogene Farwell's. The message was short, and the ink had a life of its own. To the board of the Crimson Moon Foundation, you are to dissolve this body upon my death and transfer its full assets to the Culinary Preservation League under the trusteeship of Mr. Nero Wolfe, who will act in perpetuity to safeguard the principles of flavor uncorrupted by commerce. The Crimson Moon must set. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was crowded with the sound of tempers loading. Harold Vale went white to the hairline. Krell blinked as if the stage lights had just changed. Orozco's jaw set, a botanist watching her garden burn. Renoir whispered, "Oh, hell." Lennox Vale closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. So that's what she meant. Harold exploded. "No, this is absurd. You can't—" "Mr. Vale," Wolfe said, voice low but heavy as granite, "you are interrupting the dead, which is indecorous." I half expected him to ring for Fritz with handcuffs. Orozco leaned forward. "Is there proof that this is her handwriting?" "There is," Lennox said. "I've seen enough of her notes to know it." "Then the foundation is gone," Wolfe said calmly. "Unless, of course, someone has substituted the document. Which brings us to the evening's practical problem." He reached for the velvet pouch and opened it. Inside lay a small metal disc, polished crimson, engraved with a crescent moon. "This," he said, holding it up, "is Mrs. Farwell's personal seal, and this—" He glanced toward the door. That's when the bell rang. It wasn't Fritz's ring. It was sharp, insistent. Someone outside who hadn't been invited but knew enough to come now. Wolfe's gaze slid toward me. "Archie," he said, "see who has chosen the wrong moment to join the living." I went to the door with the kind of expectation that belongs in a bad dream, something you know will happen, but not the shape it'll take. The bell rang again before I reached the vestibule, sharper this time, like it was trying to prove a point. When I opened the door, the point took human form, a man in his 30s, raincoat damp, hat pulled low, and a face that had learned discretion from practice, not theory. He was breathing hard, but not from stares. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked. His voice carried the clipped efficiency of someone used to explaining things just once. "Name's Kearns. I'm private security for the Crimson Moon Foundation." "We were told there wasn't any," I said. "If you're looking for your employer, they're all in the parlor discussing the afterlife." He shook his head quickly, eyes darting past me as though he might see the scene through walls. "I'm not here on their request. Something happened at the Foundation offices half an hour ago. The place was broken into." That pulled the conversation from courtesy to necessity. "Come in," I said. He stepped inside, the air bringing with it a faint metallic smell, maybe from the rain or maybe from something more direct. His left hand twitched as if it wanted a cigarette, but was too polite to ask. "In here," I told him, opening the office door. Every head turned. Vale's brothers first, then Renoir, then the rest. Wolfe didn't move. His eyes traveled to Kearns as if he were a misplaced item in a well-ordered shelf. Kearns straightened. "Mr. Wolfe, I know who you are. There's been an incident connected to this." He nodded toward the desk and the open tin. "We got word someone broke into the Foundation archives about 40 minutes ago. Papers gone, safes forced, and—" He stopped, lips tightening. "And," Wolfe prompted, his tone precise enough to slice bread. "One of the clerks was found unconscious. Not dead, but out cold. Whoever it was knew where to look. They took every original record of Mrs. Farwell's directives." Lennox Vale exhaled through his nose, long and controlled. Harold made a small, triumphant sound that didn't fit the room. "So much for your transparency," he said. Orozco shot him a glare. "You think that helps your position?" "Enough," Wolfe said, and that single word froze them like a clock whose spring snapped. "Mr. Kearns, you have come to report a burglary. You suspect connection to this document. Why?" "Because the only people who knew the location of those archives are sitting in this room," Kearns said evenly. "And because the alarm system was cut exactly 1 hour before this meeting began." "Then," Wolfe murmured, "our gathering was not merely observed, but scheduled to coincide, which makes whoever sent you here—" He looked at Kearns. "Either a messenger or a test." "I came on my own," Kearns said. "Mr. Vale doesn't know me well, but I worked under Mrs. Farwell. She told me once that if trouble ever came wearing polite shoes, I should find Nero Wolfe." Wolfe's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Mrs. Farwell anticipated too much for one lifetime. Kearns' eyes went to the desk. "So that's the directive." "It is," Wolfe said. "Or claims to be." Kearns stepped closer, cautious, the way a man approaches a sleeping animal whose teeth he's heard described. "Then I'd say the people who broke in tonight didn't get what they wanted. They wanted to prevent this being read, or replaced it elsewhere." "That," Wolfe said, "depends on whether the thing before us is genuine." The air shifted then. Something in the word genuine made all 4 guests stiffen differently. Guilt has its own dialect. Renoir lowered her gaze to her glass. Krell fidgeted with his cufflink. Orozco's fingers tapped once against her knee, and Harold Vale's jaw hardened as if he were holding his own tongue, hostage. Wolfe gestured toward me. "Archie, if you will kindly bring the letter again." I took it from the desk drawer and handed it over. Wolfe studied it for a long moment, then passed it to Kearns. "Do you recognize the seal or the paper?" Kearns inspected both with professional detachment. "Yes, that's the Foundation's ceremonial stationery. Only 2 boxes ever made. Mrs. Farwell kept one, the other was in the vault." "And now the vault is empty," Wolfe said softly. "Yes, sir." "Then," Wolfe said, leaning back, "someone here anticipated tonight's revelation, broke into the vault, removed the original copy, perhaps to create a forgery or to destroy proof. But they did not know that another existed, prepared for this occasion and placed in my keeping by Mrs. Farwell's foresight. Which means," he said, eyes narrowing, "we are looking at a person who fears exposure more than gain." Harold Vale barked a laugh. You mean my brother? Lennox didn't look at him. I mean whoever can't survive without this foundation's purse strings. That includes you, Orozco said. You control its funds. And you, Krell added, take its grants. The tension was thick enough to serve. Wolfe didn't raise his voice. Enough. Mr. Kearns, you will remain here. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him to send Sergeant Stebbins. No more than that. This is not yet murder, but we are creeping close. The reactions were mixed. Krell's expression tightened into stage fright. Renoir drained her glass. Orozco looked almost relieved, like someone finally naming the disease. I made the call. Kramer wasn't thrilled about being asked to send his second-in-command instead of himself, but Wolfe's name carries the weight of inevitability. Stebbins would arrive within 20 minutes. When I came back, Wolfe was speaking again. Mrs. Farwell's directive, he said, was written 3 years ago. Why was it not revealed until now, Mr. Vale? Lennox replied carefully. She left instructions it be unsealed only when the Foundation faced what she called a crisis of conscience. I believed that time had come. And your brother disagreed, Wolfe said. Harold's knuckles whitened. Because it's madness. Handing control to a stranger. Not a stranger, Wolfe interrupted. A custodian. One she considered incorruptible, which, of course, makes her judgment suspect by definition. Even Lennox allowed himself a faint smile at that. The clock read 9:45 when Stebbins arrived, hat in hand, suspicion in his eyes. He took one look at the crowd and muttered, "If this is social, I'm underdressed." "Hardly social," I said. "Try potential conspiracy with a garnish of burglary." Wolfe gave him a brief outline. The sealed tin, the directive, the break-in, and the warning note we'd received earlier. Stebbins asked for it, and I handed over the envelope with the typed threat. He read it, grunted, and pocketed it. "Looks like you've got somebody who knew the timing," he said. "And maybe the handwriting of Mrs. Farwell." "Precisely," Wolfe replied. "Someone within this circle, or adjacent to it, who knew both her habits and mine." That earned him a collective silence. Then Renoir spoke softly. "You think one of us wrote that?" "I think," Wolfe said, eyes half shut, "that whoever did will soon learn that forgery is not merely an art of imitation, but of motive. Archie, you will accompany Mr. Stebbins to the Foundation office. Bring back a sample of Mrs. Farwell's handwriting from any surviving record. I must see whether her last directive was written by a loyal hand or by one guided." I nodded. "And if the burglar's still there?" "Then," Wolfe said, closing his eyes, "you will ask him whether he prefers ink or blood on his conscience." Kearns opened the door for me, and I stepped into the night, where the city hummed like it knew we'd just cracked something open and hadn't yet seen what would spill out. The rain had started by the time Stebbins and I reached the Foundation's building on East 58th, a narrow front wedged between a shuttered gallery and a tailor who had no business being open past 9. The night pressed down with the kind of steady drizzle that makes the city smell like electricity and old coins. A uniformed cop I didn't know stood by the door, yawning into his collar. He recognized Stebbins, nodded, and let us in. Inside, the air was all wrong. You could smell the violation, a mix of damp wool, cheap plaster dust, and the faint, oily tang of a broken safe. The lights were on where they shouldn't be, and the floor was a war zone of paper. Somebody had gone through the file cabinets like a raccoon with an accounting degree. Stebbins gave a low whistle. "Looks like your friends have been busy." "Don't call them that," I said. "I'm already regretting dinner invitations." The Foundation's main office wasn't big. 2 desks, a conference table, filing walls, and a door at the back that looked like it led to storage. A plaque read, "Crimson Moon Foundation, serving the future through the past." Whoever wrote that had believed their own brochure. We split the work, Stebbins photographing the mess, me checking for anything that might still have a pulse. The safe was indeed cracked open, with its door hanging like a drunk's grin. Inside, nothing but a few folders left behind as decoys. On the floor, a small scatter of crimson wax flakes caught my light. I pocketed one, same shade and texture as the seal Wolfe had broken an hour ago. "Archie," Stebbins called. "Take a look here." He'd opened the storage door. Inside was a narrow room lined with boxes and a single desk covered in ledgers. On the floor beside it was a body, a man in shirt sleeves, breathing shallowly, his head marked by a welt that told its own story. "Alive?" I asked. "Barely. Somebody clipped him clean." Stebbins crouched and checked the man's pockets. "Name tag says Walter Fry, clerk." I found a bottle of water on the shelf, poured some on a handkerchief, and pressed it against the man's forehead. He stirred, blinked, and squinted like the light had come back too soon. "You're safe," I said. "We're not the ones who did this." "You work here?" He nodded weakly. "Mrs. Farwell's archives. They wanted them. The tall one hit me." "Tall one?" Stebbins said. "Male? Female?" "Male," Frey murmured. "Gloves. Grey coat. He said the word moon before I went out." His voice thinned, then gave up. We called for an ambulance. When they came, he was breathing easier, though not talking. I stayed back long enough to pocket another item, a slip of paper torn from a ledger. Written in fountain pen, the words Culinary Preservation League. Benefactors, list withheld. The handwriting wasn't Wolfe's kind of puzzle, but it was a breadcrumb. On the ride back, Stebbins kept his eyes on the rain. "You think this connects to the crowd in the brownstone?" "I think Mrs. Farwell didn't believe in coincidence," I said, "and Wolfe believes in even less." When we got back, it was close to midnight. The brownstone was lit but silent, which usually means Wolfe was digesting both food and facts. The guests were gone, and the office had the air of a courtroom after the jury leaves. Wolfe sat behind his desk, hands steepled, eyes half closed. Vale, Lennox, remained in the red chair, his brother gone, which probably saved us another argument. "Report," Wolfe said. I gave it. The break-in, the cracked safe, Frey, the crimson wax, and the note fragment. When I handed over the wax flake, Wolfe took it delicately between thumb and forefinger, held it to the light, and made a sound that translated as expected but unpleasant. "It matches," he said. "Mrs. Farwell's seal. Whoever staged that burglary wanted to suggest the theft of this letter's twin, yet they left too much." Vale frowned. "Too much?" "Excess is the enemy of deception," Wolfe said. "The violence, the broken lock, the scattered papers, all decoration. The true objective was to confirm to someone that the original record had been destroyed. But why create that assurance unless the forgery already existed?" "You mean tonight's letter," Vale said, voice taut. "I mean precisely that." The line of Wolfe's mouth deepened. "Mrs. Farwell's instruction made me custodian, not fool. I took the liberty of having Mr. Goodwin fetch evidence, not proof. There is a distinction." I handed over the scrap of handwriting I'd found. Wolfe studied it, eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Farwell's hand, yes. But the ink is recent, within a month. She has been dead for 2 years. So someone practiced her script." Vale's jaw tensed. "That narrows it." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "To someone with access to her letters, her seal, and a motive to prevent the Foundation's transfer. That list, Mr. Vale, includes your brother." Vale didn't answer, but his silence did the work. Just then, the doorbell rang again. A late hour for surprises, but this night had committed itself to the theme. Fritz answered, and his voice carried back, uncertain. He returned a moment later with a visitor trailing him, Juliette Renoir. Her coat was damp, her lipstick smudged, her eyes bright with the kind of fear that doesn't fake well. "I shouldn't be here," she said, breath catching. "But I think you should see this." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver recorder. Someone left it in my restaurant office tonight. No note, no name. Just this. Play it, Wolfe said. She pressed a button. The room filled with static. Then a man's voice, roughened but clear. If the moon opens, he dies. Tell Wolfe to stay out. The tape clicked off. The silence afterward was absolute. Vale's knuckles whitened on the armrest. He. Wolfe's gaze didn't waver. We shall assume the antecedent will make itself known soon enough. He turned to me. Archie, tomorrow you will visit Ms. Renoir's establishments, learn who entered after hours, speak to her staff, and find the origin of that recording. Mr. Vale, you will remain available. I will summon you when I am ready for candor. Renoir sank into a chair, trembling now that the adrenaline had left her. You think this means someone's going to die? Wolfe looked at her the way a mathematician looks at a stubborn equation. No, madam. Someone already decided who must. My task is to determine whether they succeed, and to decide whether the death will be literal or professional. His voice stayed calm, but the light in his eyes had shifted. Slow, certain, dangerous. Archie, he said finally, see that our doors are locked. The moon has begun to wane, and I dislike being observed while thinking. I don't usually lock doors in a house where Nero Wolfe lives. He's enough of a deterrent on his own, but that night I slid the bolts with a little extra attention. When a voice on tape starts promising death, even a man with my patience gets thoughtful about door hinges. Renoir stayed in the office, pale under the lamplight, while Wolfe regarded her with the sort of sympathy a chess player reserves for an opponent about to lose the queen. Miss Renoir, he said, when did you find the device? This evening, she said, her voice thin but steady. Around 7. I was closing one of my restaurants, Le Cercle Rouge, when my manager found it under the desk. No note, no explanation. I didn't know what to do. I thought about going to the police, but then she gestured toward Wolfe. You already knew about the crimson moon. Indeed, Wolfe murmured, and now the moon grows redder. I poured her a glass of water, which she took without thanks, but with need. Her hands trembled when she lifted it. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled, watching the condensation bead down the glass. This recorder was planted, he said. It was meant to ensure delivery of its message without revealing its courier. Whoever left it assumed you would not ignore a threat directed at your circle. Renoir swallowed hard. Do you think it's serious? Madame, Wolfe said, men rarely counterfeit menace without intent. Someone believes control of this foundation, or the destruction of its successor, requires either fear or blood. That is serious by definition. Vale stood from the red chair. Then who's the he? Me? Harold? Someone else? That, Wolfe said, depends on whose death most profits the rest. Renoir set the glass down, leaving a ring of water that spread like guilt. If you think I know who made that recording, I don't. My staff's loyal. They wouldn't. They would, Wolfe interrupted. Loyalty is a temperament, not an oath. You pay them, someone else might pay more. Her mouth tightened. You have a low opinion of people. An accurate one, Wolfe said. The phone rang before she could answer. I picked it up. It was Stebbins, his voice roughened by night and duty. Goodwin, we got something. That clerk, Frey, woke up. Says he recognized the guy who hit him. Who? Didn't get a full look, but he swears it was someone from the foundation board. He says the guy called him by name before swinging. And he heard a car leave. Right after. Black sedan. Which Vale brother drives black? Both, Stebbins said grimly. But one was parked outside your place when we arrived. Want me to haul the other in? Not yet, I said. Wolfe wants the fish to swim a little before he nets it. I hung up and relayed the message. Wolfe didn't blink, but his eyelids drooped until only a sliver of gold showed beneath them. So our burglar was recognized, he said, and he was sufficiently familiar with his victim to call him by name. Interesting. That reduces the suspects to 2, or 3, if we include Vanity. Vale frowned. You mean my brother? Your brother, yes, Wolfe said. But not only. Mr. Krell is tall, affable, and fond of dramatics. He would consider even larceny an opportunity for staging. Dr. Orozco, though unlikely, has the intellect for misdirection. And Miss Renoir? Renoir flinched. I've already said. Has proximity, Wolfe finished. You were within a mile of the Foundation office when the break-in occurred. That's a coincidence, she snapped. I had a dinner service, 50 witnesses. Coincidence, Wolfe said, is merely a name we give to someone else's plan. Vale turned sharply toward her. Why didn't you mention that before? Because I didn't know it mattered. Everything matters, Wolfe said softly. When people start bleeding over documents. The room went still. Fritz appeared at the door, silent as an omen, holding a folded note on a silver tray. This just came, sir, he said. Delivered by hand. No messenger waited. I took it and passed it to Wolfe. He opened it, read, and passed it back to me. It said, the wrong Vale has the letter. Before morning there will be only one. Vale stared at it, color draining. That's a threat. It's a timetable, I said. And it's not subtle. Renoir covered her mouth. You think they mean Harold? Or you, I said. Or anyone whose surname makes trouble. Wolfe pressed the bell for Fritz. Prepare 2 rooms upstairs, he said. Mr. Vale and Miss Renoir will stay under this roof tonight. Archie, you will contact Saul Panzer and have him stationed across the street until dawn. No one enters or leaves this house without notice. Whoever orchestrated these gestures of intimidation will expect us to scatter. We will not oblige. Vale hesitated. If you think I'm going to hide while my brother, you will stay, Wolfe said, final as a verdict. It is easier to guard you here than to identify your corpse elsewhere. That silenced him. He nodded once, stiffly. Renoir looked grateful in the way people do when fear outpaces pride. When they had gone upstairs with Fritz, the brownstone settled into its after-hours rhythm, a hum just below silence. Wolfe sat back, face unreadable. The letter was forged, he said quietly. But whoever forged it believed it would be accepted. That belief required either access or sanction. Only the Vale brothers together could provide both. You think they're working as a pair? No, Wolfe said. I think one used the other's reputation to mask his own. The elder brother brought me the tin knowing it contained falsehood. The younger created that falsehood believing his brother would be blamed. Between them they formed a perfect instrument of mutual destruction. He looked toward the window where the rain streaked the glass like handwriting. Mrs. Farwell was a clever woman. She knew these men. She foresaw that the moon would draw blood not from strangers, but from those bound by loyalty and greed. She left me her final recipe, to season pride with fear until the flavor reveals itself. I checked my watch. So we wait till morning. Until morning, Wolfe said. Then we invite the remaining guests back for breakfast. He shut his eyes, leaning back. If they are all still alive, the crimson moon may yet set on truth instead of ruin. The rain outside deepened, whispering against the shutters. Upstairs, floorboards creaked with the weight of guests pretending to sleep. In the office, the tin sat open on the desk. Empty now, but somehow louder than before. Wolfe didn't move again, and I didn't speak. The house listened, holding its breath with the rest of us, waiting to see which Vale would greet the sunrise. Morning crawled in gray and thin, the kind of light that doesn't commit to being day. I'd managed about 3 hours of half-sleep in my room upstairs, one ear tuned to the house, waiting for trouble to make an entrance. None did. When I went down at 7, the brownstone smelled like coffee and Fritz's idea of reassurance, brioche and bacon, which could mend most faiths. Wolfe was already in the office. Behind his desk, wearing the expression of a man reading the morning paper as if it had personally disappointed him. "Good morning," I said. "Everyone still breathing?" "For now," he said. Mr. Vale and Miss Renoir were seen to their rooms at 11. Fritz reports no movement during the night. No movement's not always a good sign. He gave me a look that was half reproach, half agreement. You have a talent for phrasing vulgarities as truths. I had a call from Saul at 6. He observed Harold Vale enter his building around midnight. Alone. So both brothers alive and accounted for. That's progress. Progress, he said, is a word often used to dignify survival. I poured myself coffee and let the warmth do its work. You planning to invite the others early, or shall we wait for them to come with funeral wreaths? They will come, Wolfe said. Miss Renoir will insist, out of anxiety. Mr. Krell out of curiosity, Dr. Orozco out of duty. The younger Mr. Vale will come because he must see whether his brother breathes. They are creatures of motive, and motive is predictable. Right on cue, the doorbell rang. Fritz opened it to admit Renoir, pale but deliberate, wearing yesterday's nerves under fresh perfume. She looked like she'd dressed for confession. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Is there any news?" "None you'd wish to hear before breakfast," Wolfe said. "Sit." She did, perching on the edge of the red chair as though it might decide otherwise. I handed her coffee, which she accepted as if it were a fragile contract. Before she could sip, the bell rang again. This time it was Krell, looking less television-ready than usual. His tie hung at a democratic angle, and his smile had been misplaced somewhere between Fifth Avenues and despair. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "I heard from Orozco this morning. She said there's been talk, police inquiries, a burglary, threats. Is this true, or is someone auditioning for melodrama?" "Both," Wolfe said. Krell laughed once, a sound brittle enough to break itself. "I suppose I should have known. You do attract the unusual." "Only when it's determined to be attracted," I said. By 8:30, the rest had arrived. Orozco first, tight-lipped and analytical, followed by Harold Vale, who looked like a man walking into his own eulogy. Lennox remained upstairs until Fritz fetched him. When the two brothers faced each other in the office, the air lost its balance. Harold's voice was sharp enough to draw lines. "You've managed to make this a spectacle, haven't you?" Lennox stayed seated. "I didn't plant a forged letter or break into an office." "You don't know that it was forged." "I know it wasn't written by Mrs. Farwell," Lennox said. "She didn't have the kind of spite that drips from that wording." Wolfe raised a hand. "Gentlemen, if you insist on posturing, do so outside. Inside my office, words are used for meaning, not for measurement." They both shut up, though Harold's shoulders stayed squared like he expected a fight to start anyway. Wolfe's gaze went from one to the other, then to the tin on the desk. Still open, still empty. "Someone attempted to destroy records last night," he said. "That someone was known to the clerk who was struck. The man was tall and wore a grey coat. That narrows it. Mr. Krell, what color is your overcoat?" "Charcoal," Krell said. "Dr. Orozco?" "Black." "Mr. Vale?" Wolfe's eyes flicked to Harold. Harold hesitated. "Grey." No one spoke. Renoir's breath hitched audibly. Krell muttered something that ended with figures. "I left the office at 7, Harold said quickly. "I went home. Ask anyone in my building." "I intend to," Wolfe said. "But first, we must determine what was worth stealing. Archie." I passed him the scrap I'd found at the foundation, the note about the Culinary Preservation League. Wolfe turned it so the light caught the handwriting. "This," he said, "was torn from a ledger kept by the foundation. It references the League, the very organization designated as heir in the forged directive. Someone feared that ledger's contents would expose a connection between the League and the Foundation, specifically that its benefactors list was withheld." "Why?" Krell spoke first, too fast. Because the League's donors wanted anonymity. That's common in philanthropy. Philanthropy? Wolfe's eyebrow rose like a challenge. Mr. Krell, your sauces are marketed under the League's seal. You profit from its prestige. That's commerce, not charity. Krell flushed. I didn't write that list. Perhaps not, Wolfe said. But you benefited from whoever did. Dr. Orozco, do you know the League's donors? She shook her head. No one does. It's managed by an external accountant, a Mr. Harold Vale, if I'm not mistaken. The silence that followed had corners. Harold looked as though someone had swapped his air for water. That's not criminal. Mrs. Farwell appointed me to oversee financial distributions. And yet, Wolfe said, the same man entrusted with distributing her funds had motive to destroy her directive, which would end that privilege. Last night's burglary, the forged letter, the threats, all converge on preservation, not of cuisine, but of power. That's absurd, Harold said. You have no proof. Proof, Wolfe said, is forthcoming. He turned to me. Archie, Saul is outside. Ask him to bring in the envelope he collected from Mr. Vale's office this morning. I went out, found Saul waiting on the stoop, hat tipped low. He handed me a large envelope. From Vale's desk drawer, he said, hidden under invoices. Inside were checks, 10 of them, drawn from the League's account, each made out to the same payee, Martin Krell, consulting fees. When I laid them on the desk, the room froze. Krell went white. Harold lunged forward. You had no right. I have every right, Wolfe said. You embezzled funds meant for research and diverted them to commercial ends. Mr. Krell's cooperation provided you public legitimacy. When Mrs. Farwell's letter threatened to end your control, you conspired to replace it, to keep your roles intact. You then arranged the burglary to erase the ledger that tied you both to the League. Unfortunately, your violence revealed you. Harold sagged into a chair, face crumbling. Krell started to speak but found no script to read from. Renoir exhaled like she'd been holding breath for an hour. Inspector Kramer will be here shortly, Wolfe said. You may explain yourselves to him. Mrs. Farwell's trust will be restored, and the moon, crimson as it is, will finally set. He leaned back, eyelids lowering. Archie, see them comfortable until the law arrives, and have Fritz prepare eggs. Philosophy requires nourishment. I nodded, but I couldn't resist a grin. Sure, boss. I'll make sure our guests are sunny side up. Wolfe didn't answer. He was already lost in the silence he liked best, the kind that follows when a human puzzle has given up all its secrets. Kramer arrived 20 minutes later, which for him was practically instant teleportation. He came in with Stebbins trailing behind him like a dark cloud, the both of them wearing the faces of men who had been dragged out of a decent breakfast for something that might make the papers. I gave them the condensed version, which Kramer took standing, hands jammed in the pockets of a raincoat that could have served as armor. When I finished, he grunted once, looked at Wolfe, and said, So it's another family brawl dressed up as philosophy. If you insist on vulgarity, Wolfe said without looking up from his desk, at least be accurate. This was not brawl, it was betrayal conducted under cover of taste and trust. Subtler, but equally noxious. Kramer's eyes went to the two men on the couch. Harold Vale slumped forward, elbows on knees, face chalky. Martin Krell sitting bolt upright, clutching his reputation like a handkerchief. You two understand you're under suspicion of fraud and assault? Krell started to speak, but Wolfe cut him off without raising his voice. They understand, Inspector. What they do not understand is how fully their own appetites betrayed them. Kramer sighed. Save the sermon for the judge, Wolfe. Stebbins, bag those checks. We'll start with handwriting analysis. Stebbins moved toward the desk, but Wolfe lifted a hand. Not yet. Before you confiscate evidence, allow me to clarify a point you might otherwise miss. Mr. Vale's guilt is certain. Mr. Krell's less so. He accepted illicit funds, but did not mastermind their theft. His failing was vanity, not villainy. Krell's eyes flickered toward Wolfe with the kind of hope a drowning man reserves for driftwood. You believe me? I do not believe, Wolfe said. I deduce there is a distinction. You lacked the subtlety to forge Mrs. Farwell's hand or the foresight to plant a false trail. Your involvement ended with indulgence. Kramer snorted. So the younger Vale cooked the books and staged a break-in to hide it. Partly, Wolfe said, but you'll need more than ledgers to close your file. The threat letters, the burglary, the voice on Miss Renoir's recorder, those were meant to deflect, to suggest danger from outside. Mr. Vale needed chaos to disguise control. Which brings us to motive, I said. He kept the Foundation's funds flowing through his pet league. When Mrs. Farwell's original letter got ready to cut him out, he built a counterfeit one and tried to destroy any proof of the real thing. Kramer folded his arms. Then why go through the charade of bringing the letter here last night? Because, Wolfe said, his brother insisted. Lennox Vale was a man of law. He wanted the letter opened publicly. Harold couldn't stop him without exposing his own forgery. So he came to me under pretext, hoping that my scrutiny would sanctify what he'd arranged. When the burglary failed to remove all traces of the real directive, he gambled on bluff. It was, predictably, a losing bet. The elder Vale, sitting stiff beside the orchids, spoke for the first time since Kramer arrived. His voice was calm, but the edges had gone ragged. You're saying my brother? Yes, Wolfe said simply. He made you his alibi. When Mrs. Farwell chose me as potential trustee, she anticipated the greed she'd left behind. Her final test was not for me, but for you. You failed it. She trusted I would notice. Kramer motioned to Stebbins, who read Wolfe's face before his words. Take them both, Kramer said. We'll sort the rest downtown. When they were gone, the brown stone seemed to stretch, as if relieved to have its space returned. Renoir was still by the window, staring at the rain-smeared city. Dr. Orozco stood near the bookshelf, arms crossed, trying to keep dignity from collapsing into fatigue. Wolfe's gaze lingered on them both. I dislike being used, he said, but I dislike being underestimated more. Mrs. Farwell's imagination spared me neither. Orozco turned. What happens to the Foundation now? It dissolves, Wolfe said. Her will dictates as much, but its assets will pass to the Culinary Preservation League under lawful trusteeship this time. She nodded slowly. Then her intention survives. Barely, Wolfe said, though I will not be taking the position. Custodianship implies motion. Renoir looked back at him. And you never move. Rarely, he said, and only when I'm sure of the destination. Fritz appeared at the doorway again, signaling breakfast readiness with the subtlety of a saint. Wolfe rose, an event in itself, and moved toward the dining room with the momentum of inevitability. I stayed behind to gather the strays of the morning, the empty tin, the wax flake, the envelope that had started it all. When I looked up, Lennox Vale was watching me. He'll be convicted, he said quietly. Maybe, I said, but I'd say your mother figure already sentenced him when she left that letter in Wolfe's care. He nodded, but there was no relief in it, only the weight of a man whose family had just been reduced to case law. He left without another word. In the dining room, Wolfe had begun dissecting his breakfast with the precision of a cross-examination. The orchids upstairs were getting their morning mist, and Fritz moved like a priest conducting a sacrament. Renoir and Orozco declined to join, citing exhaustion. When they left, Wolfe and I were alone. You knew it was Harold as soon as you heard about the gray coat, I said. I suspected, he replied. But suspicion without proof is conjecture, and conjecture is for amateurs. What settled it was his silence when I mentioned Mrs. Farwell's relish. the pomegranate and pepper. He pretended ignorance, though I know she sent a jar to each trustee annually. He feared admitting familiarity, lest it betray his forgery. A small omission, but telling. I leaned back, smiling. So the moon sets, the villains fall, and order is restored. What do we call this one? The Crimson Moon Affair. He buttered his toast with deliberate grace. We call it dinner. Postponed. I raised my cup. To Mrs. Farwell, then, for seasoning the city's morals. He looked up, eyes glinting. Morals, he said, are like sauces. Use too much and you mask the flavor. Too little and you taste only the meat. I laughed, and he gave one of those microscopic nods that might have been approval. Outside, the rain eased, leaving the street washed clean. Inside, the brownstone reclaimed its stillness. The crimson moon had set, and Nero Wolfe, immovable, unhurried and wholly himself, had once again proved that in a city full of motion, thought remains the only force that never needs to run. The rain stopped before noon, but the day didn't brighten. New York looked scrubbed and gray, the way it does when it's waiting for news to decide whether to gloat or sulk. Inside the brownstone, the air had shifted again. Lighter than last night, but with a residue, like a room where a violin had been played too long. Wolfe was in the plant rooms, indulging his orchids, while I handled the necessary aftermath. Phone calls from Kramer, paperwork for the check evidence, and one visit from a reporter who knew too much and was told less. By 3, the house had settled into its usual rhythm. Silence, punctuated by the rustle of Fritz's competence and the occasional groan from upstairs that meant Wolfe had found a new flaw in humanity, possibly botanical. I was in the office, writing up my notes, when the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting Kramer again. Instead, the voice that came through was female and quiet, almost embarrassed. "Mr. Goodwin, this is Dr. Orozco." I straightened. "Doctor, you calling to thank us for saving civilization or to correct our footnotes?" "I wish it were that simple," she said. "I'm at the university. The police returned the Foundation's files this morning. I went through them. There's something missing. Missing as in misplaced by accident, or as in someone made sure it stayed that way." "The second," she said. "The ledger you found the torn page from, the one mentioning the Culinary Preservation League, it's incomplete. The last entries were removed entirely. The handwriting ends mid-sentence." That got my attention. "How recent are we talking?" "The ink stops less than a week before Mrs. Farwell's death." I felt a cold line trace my spine. "I'll pass it on. Don't move anything." I hung up, sat for a moment, then went upstairs. Wolfe was at his bench, sleeves rolled, tweezers in hand, examining a bloom the color of bruised ivory. He didn't look up when I came in. "Archie," he said, "you bring me agitation or lunch?" "Information," I said. Orozco called. "There's a missing page from that ledger, the last one, written just before Farwell checked out." He turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing. "Describe her tone." "Controlled but not academic. She's rattled." "Then the omission is not clerical," he said. "It's deliberate. Someone removed an entry that mattered." "Kramer's boys already boxed the lot," I said. "If something was lifted, it happened before they got there." "Obviously," he murmured. "Mrs. Farwell's death preceded the letter, and the letter's forgery required knowledge of her records. Therefore, the missing entry may identify not motive, but origin. Whoever removed it did so to conceal authorship." "You mean the forgery wasn't Vale's handiwork after all?" "Not entirely," Wolfe said, and his voice took on that slow weight it gets when he's rebalancing the universe. "Harold Vale was capable of greed, not of mimicry. He could not reproduce Mrs. Farwell's hand without assistance. We assumed his accomplice was Krell, out of convenience. But vanity does not counterfeit handwriting. It only signs endorsements. Someone else helped him." Someone who's still out there, I said. He nodded. Call Dr. Orozco. Ask her to bring the ledger here. Now. By 5, she arrived, still in her work clothes and looking like she'd crossed the city by thought alone. Fritz ushered her in with tea and disapproval for damp shoes. She set the ledger on Wolfe's desk, opened it carefully, and pointed. Here. The entries are consistent until this point. Then the ink trails off, as if interrupted. The next page has been removed cleanly. I bent over the gap. The last intact line read, "Meeting arranged. Final directives to be delivered through," and stopped there. The cut was surgical. Whoever did it knew how to erase without leaving blood. Wolfe's lips compressed. Archie. Magnifier. I handed it over. He examined the torn edge, then leaned back heavy as a verdict. The paper fibers are roughened, not sliced, torn in haste, but by a strong hand. And the binding glue has traces of salt crystals, human sweat. Someone nervous, perhaps rushed. Orozco watched him, eyes sharp. Do you think it was Harold Vale? No, Wolfe said. Mr. Vale lacked subtlety, and he had the ledger later, not sooner. The page was removed while Mrs. Farwell lived, or immediately after she died, which suggests proximity. I frowned. Who had that kind of access? She hesitated. Her assistant, a woman named Marjorie Lyle. She handled correspondence, typed dictations, and prepared her wills, but she left the city after the funeral. I haven't heard from her since. Wolfe's eyes opened fully. Left or was helped to leave? I don't know. She said she was going to Maine to take care of her mother. Wolfe tapped the blotter. Find her, Archie. Where do I start? Begin with the predictable. The League's payrolls, Mrs. Farwell's personal accounts. If she aided Harold Vale, money will have marked the path. If she acted alone, we may find intent instead of payment. Orozco closed the ledger. You think she forged the letter? I think, Wolfe said. She prepared it for Mrs. Farwell herself, that it was meant as a safeguard, one she never delivered because she died too soon. Vale found it later and exploited it. Hence his confidence that I would confirm its legitimacy. He believed it authentic because it was authentic, just not intended for his purpose. Orozco's expression shifted from confusion to understanding, then alarm. Then Mrs. Farwell meant for you to take control regardless. Precisely, Wolfe said softly. But Harold Vale's theft twisted her safeguard into a weapon, and if Miss Lyle still lives, she holds the only untainted truth. I stood. I'll get Saul on her trail. He's good with women who don't want to be found. Do that, Wolfe said, and be discreet. If she vanished with assistance, others may prefer her to remain so. As Orozco left, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the darkened window, nervous, thoughtful, and maybe a little frightened. When the door shut behind her, Wolfe leaned back, hands folded on his stomach. She is intelligent, he said, but intelligence without patience is dangerous. Sounds familiar, I said. He ignored that. Archie, if Miss Lyle was complicit, she may come to us before we find her. Desperation has a way of seeking order. Keep the doors locked, and if the bell rings after midnight, answer carefully. I nodded, noting the edge in his voice. The last time he'd said something like that, a corpse had followed within 12 hours. That night, the brownstone was quiet again, too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't rest. It listens. Wolfe stayed downstairs longer than usual, eyes fixed on the ledger, tracing the missing page as if he could will it back into existence. Around midnight, when I finally went up to bed, he was still there, motionless, the orchids dimmed above him. And somewhere, out in the damp city, a woman named Marjorie Lyle might have been listening too, deciding whether the safest place to run was toward us or away. It was some time after 1 when the bell rang. I'd been halfway to sleep, balancing on that thin line between habit and hope, when the sharp metallic sound carved through the quiet. The brownstone isn't the kind of house that welcomes unexpected visitors at that hour, especially not when Nero Wolfe has already warned against answering casually. I grabbed my robe and my revolver, call it tradition, and went down the stairs, silent as the rugs allowed. The hall light threw a narrow glow across the vestibule. Through the beveled glass of the front door, I saw a shadow, small, hunched, uncertain. Whoever it was didn't try the bell again. I waited, counting seconds, then called out, "You've got 5 to either speak up or step off." The voice that came back was thin but steady. "Mr. Goodwin, my name is Marjorie Lyle. I have to see Mr. Wolfe." That was a name that could wake a man faster than coffee. I opened the door but kept the chain in place. She stood there, rain on her coat, eyes wide with that jittery edge that comes from more fear than sleep. Mid-30s, fair, face pinched by exhaustion, she carried a flat satchel, held close like it contained either salvation or damnation. "Miss Lyle," I said, "you've got gall, I'll give you that. The police have been looking for you." "I know, but they can't help me. He can." She glanced past me, toward the darkened hallway behind. "Please." They followed me. That did it. I unhooked the chain and pulled her inside, closing the door before the city could notice. "All right," I said. "You get one straight answer. Who's following you?" She shook her head. "I don't know. A car since yesterday. They waited outside the hotel in Maine. When I got off the train tonight, they were still behind me. I walked for blocks before I came here." Her hands trembled as she spoke, the satchel still clutched tight. I could see the exhaustion beginning to crack her restraint. I guided her toward the office. Wolfe, as I expected, hadn't gone to bed. He was in his chair, robe over his bulk, lamp low, the ledger still open before him. When we entered, he didn't look surprised. "Miss Lyle," he said, as if greeting an overdue appointment. "You took your time." She stared. "You knew I would come." "Of course, when intelligence collides with conscience, delay is inevitable. Sit down." She obeyed. I stayed near the door, still listening for tires on wet pavement outside. "You have something to tell me," Wolfe said. "Yes," she said. "Everything." He nodded once, as if granting permission to confess. "When Mrs. Farwell was dying," she began, "she dictated 2 letters. One was to you, appointing you as custodian of the foundation. The other was to her trustees, instructing them to dissolve the foundation if corruption ever touched it. She couldn't decide which to sign. The next morning she was gone." "And the originals?" Wolfe asked. She signed neither. But both drafts were left with me. I didn't destroy them, I hid them. I thought it would be safer until the board decided. Then Harold Vale came to me, saying he wanted to honor her intentions. He offered money. I refused. The next day he came again, with a copy of the directive in her handwriting. Wolfe's eyes half closed. "Your handwriting." She froze. "You know?" "I infer," he said. "Your hand was competent enough for clerical mimicry, not deception. You copied her notes often. When Mr. Vale presented the draft, he claimed you prepared it under instruction. You, of course, realized the risk and fled." Her voice cracked. "He said it was just to formalize her wishes, that he needed something to show the bank. I didn't think he'd use it to steal everything she built." Wolfe's tone was gentler than usual, which for him was almost humane. "And the missing page?" She opened the satchel, drawing out a single sheet sealed in wax. This, the final entry. Mrs. Farwell wrote it the night before she died. I tore it out after her death, when I realized what it implied. I moved closer as Wolfe broke the seal with care. The handwriting was small, precise, unmistakably feminine. He read aloud. "Should my heart fail before I sign, Mr. Wolfe must be informed. He alone holds the logic I trust. Harold has grown restless. The League's books are not what he claims. If the letter to the trustees is opened, it means I am gone, and he is guilty." When he finished, silence hung in the room. Even the city outside seemed to hold its breath. "That," Wolfe said quietly, "would have spared much nuisance had it reached me sooner." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I wanted to send it, but his men watched the house, and after the funeral, he warned me. He said if I spoke, I'd end up like the others who knew too much." "Others?" I asked. "Meaning who?" She hesitated. "Her accountant, the one who managed the League's first funds. He died in a car accident 6 months ago. They said it was sleep at the wheel, but he never drove at night." Wolfe nodded slowly, the lines around his eyes deepening. "A convenient mortality." I asked, "You said someone followed you tonight. You think it's the same crowd?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But they knew I still had the page." "Then they'll come again," Wolfe said. "Archie, you will call Saul and Ori. Have them watch both ends of the block. Miss Lyle will remain here until morning." She looked up, startled. "You mean, stay here?" "I do," Wolfe said. "You will sleep safely under this roof. The wolves outside have already fed enough." As I went to the phone, she slumped in the chair, the tension finally loosening. Wolfe, meanwhile, read the page again, his eyes far away. When I hung up, I said, "Saul'll be here in 15, Ori in 20. They'll keep the street clean." "Good," Wolfe murmured. "This affair is nearly concluded." I gave him a look. "You mean Vale's finished?" "I mean," he said, "truth has finished. Only justice remains, and that is someone else's appetite." Miss Lyle stirred at that, as though the words touched some buried nerve. Outside, a car door slammed, faint but distinct. Wolfe didn't move. "Archie," he said softly, "see who comes to dine uninvited." I went to the window, easing the curtain aside. A dark sedan idled under the street lamp, 2 figures inside. The same car, maybe, that had followed her from Maine. I glanced back at Wolfe. He nodded once, calm as stone. "They are punctual. Bring Saul when he arrives. I will not have them interrupting before dessert." And just like that, the brownstone's peace, never permanent, always borrowed, braced itself again. The night, it seemed, wasn't done feeding.